Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I'm going to start with a bit of Trent-Telenko and continue with a bit of Trent-Telenko in my first few ports of call. Hope my brain stays with it today. Goodness me, I'm having a tough time of it this afternoon. I could do with a snooze. Nonetheless, even can't even speak. What he says is something that I almost talked about this. Well, I think I did kind of mention it in either my news video or my frontline video, and I find this a really on point observation, and I've been thinking about this myself. So the real question, he says, going forward is whether drone plus GIMLRs, so that's guided multiple launch rocket systems, things like your HIMARS, your M240 and other systems, Mars 2, are cheaper for the suppression of artillery defences mission than using F-35s with a brace of Stormbreaker small diameter bombs. This is really on point. So the Ukrainians have been forced to use ranged artillery, things like rocket systems, in order to take out targets that they otherwise would have taken out had they had air supremacy or air superiority with airframes using various missiles and whatnot, or bombs, guided bombs. The question is, I mean, it's really expensive to get airframes up and running and on missions and using up really, really expensive missiles. The question is actually this a cheaper way of doing it for the Ukrainians? It might take a longer time. It might be frustrating because of that length of time. But in the long run, it could be, I don't know, cheaper if that's a factor for the Ukrainians. He's referring to Trent-Telenko to Thomas Tyner, saying Ukraine is using all its reconnaissance drones to find Russian artillery and then gimlersing them out of existence. Drones plus GIMLRs are doing the job of the that the US Air Force would do if this was an American campaign. And I think it was that tweet I was referring to earlier. Yeah, they agree or disagree. The conversation below is if you're a military in the size of the US, I disagree. Having the capability to use both means that you could achieve it quicker and with less losses and pose more dilemmas to the enemy as they need to operate in a more complex threat environment. But of course, they're not the size of the US, are they? It depends on the theatre and the enemy, says someone else. NATO militaries can keep the cheap drones away by jamming their control frequency so the F-35 will work better against for their operations. Russia has awful comms doctrine and couldn't do that without jamming their own comms, so cheap drones work on them. I mean, so on and so forth. The conversation goes on, but it's not ideal, you could argue, that they're having to go about this attritional phase in the way that they are doing it, using HIMARS and other guided rocket systems, and a lot of their precision artillery as well. But it might be in the long run that is more sustainable. I don't know, given the situation they're in and given the costs and whatnot. But if the costs aren't being borne out by them directly, then maybe the point is moot. Trent-Telenko goes on to say, and it's same kind of subject matter here, courtesy of P-Star 11, and I shared a number of his pieces today, and I think I shared this, maybe did this yesterday. We have the Russian translation of the effect of GIMLRs, storm shadows, and other Western deep interdiction weapons on Russian manual labor logistics. Russia needs these warehouses for their labor gangs to operate with minimal oversight. This is a logistics threat. So just to remind you what I think it was this morning, actually, what P-Star 11 said, and it's a translation referring to Russian sources, or this is a translation of a Russian source. Of course, Nova Lekasivka, and I don't know if I've pronounced that right. That's a transliteration transcription of that name, which is different every time I read it. This is referring to a warehouse that got hit, or a command and control. There wasn't a command and control. It was warehouses that got hit by storm shadows and caused an awful lot of issues to the Russian forces. He says here, I won't take a photo to publish. There's nothing to please the enemy. An entire block was swept away by secondary detonations. I remember the expletive for the Ukrainians got HIMARS that summer, and the warehouses began to burn like matches. For some reason, no one was ready for this. In Oleshki, there was a mega warehouse of shots for the MLRS against which it is possible to take pictures directly. Translation is a bit weird. Everything was so visible. After another blow to Chaplinka, the warehouse was hastily taken away, but then everything was put back together. So this is what happened: is HIMARS started hitting around the summertime last year, and then they moved things back a little bit further from Oleshki, which is near the Dnipro River, to Chaplinka, which is halfway towards Crimea, and then it got hit in Chaplinka, and then they moved it back to sort of Jankoy in the north of Crimea. But of course, now that is under threat from storm shadows. So he says here, for you to understand, NATO specialists have deprived us of our usual rear. First, they moved the warehouses from the BC to 30 to 50 kilometers back, then all of them to 100 kilometers, and they made it impossible to unload the train closer to the front. The appearance of the Storm Shadow rocket forces us to either move the warehouses even further, but of course, pretty much everywhere is in range of Storm Shadow in the occupied areas, so that's not really a solution, or look for another solution. So more expensive and complex, maximum dispersion, deepening, better camouflage. In general, you'll have to be very scrupulous about the placement and protection of the BC. So basically, of all your supplies and ammunition, what do you do if everywhere can be hit? So you have to disperse it even more, so you have much smaller amounts, which makes it more complicated to do your resupply, and also it's just dreadfully inefficient and more expensive, so in time and money, so fuel and whatnot. It's a real challenge. So Trentelenko goes on to say the systematic Ukrainian destruction of Russian manual labor gang warehouses along railways is a triple whammy to Russian logistics. And remember, these are Russian logistics that don't use palleted, they don't have a palletized logistics system. So they don't put things on pallets, wooden pallets. I mean, this sounds ridiculously like petty, this, or yeah, is that really it makes a huge difference, right? You put stuff on wooden pallets, you use a forklift truck, you can pick up a shed load of stuff wrapped in cellophane or whatever, pick it all up, turn around, put it on a train, take it off the train, put it down, drive on, put it on a truck goes off at the other end, that, or maybe the other end you're taking off by hand, but certainly in these intervening points you're using a forklift. They don't have that, so everything goes onto the train by hand, everything comes off the train by hand, everything goes on to the truck by hand, everything comes off the truck by hand. And that, as he says, he calls it manual labor gang. It's just massively inefficient, time wasting, and pretty draining, I think, for those soldiers. It's just a huge issue. Forced dispersal away from labor gang railway warehouses hugely increases the labor required, the trucks required, and admin overhead needed. This is a time where attrition of Russian junior and field grade officers without a trained replacement pipeline because of the Russian armed forces instructors were fed into the combat in April and May 2022 leaves them crippled as far as the battlefield dispersal of artillery ammo is concerned. So you just got a huge lack of instructors, logistics people, so on and so forth. It's in all likelihood a lot of these, and we know instructors were fed into the front lines last year, and that led to a lack of instructors for all the mobilized who are then brought up to be trained back in sort of Russia and Belarus. Well, they're just lacking those trainers. It's a big problem. That Ukraine is shooting 5 artillery shells to every 2 Russian shells in the south of Ukraine today reflects the logistical reality. Dispersible without modern IT and mechanized logistics simply is a huge tax on what can be delivered to Russian guns. You can bet your bottom dollar that NATO, if they were doing this, everything would be sort of digitized and sorted out with AI algorithms to give you the most efficient delivery of stuff from here to there. And from there to there, and with waypoints here and there. Let the computer take over. Right, that's what we need to do. Whack it on there. Use some forklifts. Get some mechanization to that. No, it's like just a nightmare of Soviet era manual labor. So to continue, Trenton says Ukraine, in comparison, now has IT networked mechanized logistics with individual trucks loads known in a cloud network that can be tapped via smartphone or tablets. That is, every Ukrainian truck is a functional mobile distribution warehouse. This is a tremendous logistical adaptation in the face of commercial spy satellite, cruise missile, and drone dominated skies. It's also putting military camouflage on how Amazon and Walmart run their just in time retail distribution logistical systems. It's the same kind of principle, isn't it? As what's used in the commercial world, and it is so effective. All these distribution centers getting stuff out to individual people around the country, whatever country you're in, that has these large, uh, you know, corporate concerns that do this kind of stuff. It just that's what they do. It's kind of easy now because it's all they've been doing that for years. And actually, that's exactly what these armies need on the front line. So, who is using that kind of technical capability, and who isn't? I'll leave that answer to you. Fighting in your home cell phone network is a huge infrastructure advantage that Western expeditionary forces lack, but both Ukraine and Western militaries use the Starlink LEO SATCOM network for many of these cloud based dispersed logistical functions. I mean, the advantage to Ukraine is that they have that system, they have their own indigenous networks around Ukraine. I don't know occupied Ukraine, how much Russia can use these kind of systems, where they got them all set up for functionally to be used for them. Where there's a difference between, say, the Donbass and Crimea, and maybe Zaporizhia and Kherson. Kherson, I don't know. Uh, Dispersed logistics require dispersed IT plus a redundant and dispersed satellite constellation telecommunications infrastructure. That is Starlink. This Western Starlink advantage is why China is busy building its own low orbit SpaceX Starlink and Starship analogs. Really useful video to start understanding the importance of satellites is Perun's one. He's done one so far. I think it's going to be a part of two on Star Wars, basically, and the focus people are putting on in terms of anti-satellite warfare. And it's really interesting. Yeah, you probably hasn't even crossed your radar for many of you, but it is super important. And if you want to, like, if you wanted to knock out Ukrainians' capability in some sense, their communications, their logistics, then you knock out a couple of their satellites, and then what does that mean going forward? If, so it's a really complex and really nuanced topic, this, but go and check Perun's video out for that. It was much more interesting than I thought it would be, because I was like a little bit dubious about watching the one on that, but yeah, really interesting. Anyway, back to this. This brings up a point. Any digital system can be duplicated perfectly, infinitely, and cheaply within human constraints. The low barriers to entry of digital logistical systems Ukraine is demonstrating means logistics, therefore, heretofore a Western institutional advantage, is now becoming a fleeting advantage in the 21st century for populations with a critical mass of middle class computer literate people. So what he's saying there is that, yeah, this is an advantage at the moment for Ukraine. They're pretty computer literate, and there's been a hotbed Ukraine over the last decade or so for IT, and therefore this is a good hotbed now for them to tap into in order to get a competitive advantage over the Russian armed forces in terms of logistics, so on and so forth, and communications. But it is fleeting. Like, this is not it's not something that other countries are going to struggle to replicate. Someone like China could easily do this, and Russia, if they put their minds to it, they're just doctrinally still decades behind, I guess. Nations like China, India, and increasingly Indonesia are going to have a much greater innate military power projection capability simply from the local adaptation of big box retail, just in time logistical models into their economies, building a critical mass of digital logistical know how. So once you start putting this in place in your basically normal society, in your uh, commercial sector, as factoring into your economy, and that becomes embedded and well used, then you can adapt that to a military setting. Western military power projection has always been about getting there first with the most men and material, then sustaining it in the face of the opposing local forces. What happens when local non-Western militaries face Western expeditionary with the same digital logistical infrastructure and a Ukrainian-style home-fed a home field digital cell phone network to bring up dispersed IT networked mechanized logistics. I haven't a clue, but I'm sure we're going to find out, and it will be a huge surprise for Western light intervention ground forces. I don't know that we are going to find out. I mean, that's kind of like assuming that we're going to invade Indonesia or something. The US is only going to be invading China. I mean, you could. There may be some issues going on there, but I don't know that he's a bit sort of all doom and gloom there. But the point is salient. Like, you are going to be competing technologically in the sense of IT. We're already seeing this in the drone sector, uh, that it's kind of tech arms race, as much as anything, and that's the same with logistics too. Um, anyway, moving on. Let me know what you think about all that kind of stuff in the threads below. Tatarigami again getting hold of that. I don't know if this is from that doctrinal booklet he's got hold of, the Russian book on how to do warfare that he's been going through. But this is in a similar vein, with new satellite imagery from Vuhledar revealing the extent of the catastrophe experienced by the Russian army during the winter, as well as the ongoing counter-offensive. It is crucial to explore the role of minefields and operational planning in shaping assault operations. So this is carrying on really from the talk about minefields and how to lay minefields that we went through yesterday. The objective of a minefield extends beyond causing harm. It also aims to impose a specific mindset and tactical approach to the opponent, compelling them to act in a manner most advantageous for the party laying the minefield. Minefields limit the enemy's maneuvering options. Right, a few things to say. So minefields aren't necessarily about blowing up the other side's vehicles, right, or personnel. Minefields are often primarily about slowing the opposition down to give you time to do whatever. Um, but basically to have to think about things, to be inefficient, and also, a bonus of losing equipment and personnel too. Quite often it's about laying decoy mines, loads of decoy mines, metal, I don't know, metal plates and things you just litter around the field, so that the opposition think, oh my goodness, there are loads of mines in that field. Then they have to stop, get all the deminers out, wait days for that to be sorted out. And it turns out that 90% are decoys, but the 10% aren't, or whatever variation of that. So there are different objectives to lay mines. I mean, I was watching Combat Veteran React's live stream. I was just caught it today while I was cleaning out the shed, and he was talking a lot about laying mines. He had some videos of Russians laying mine, and it goes into what I was saying the other day, that they laid something like 400 mines in 2 hours in the Bakhmut area, I think. Just their ability to do that is hugely problematic. And he was talking about one of the things that is being learned from this war is future warfares are going to be all about mines. He was talking about in Iraq, where there were loads of mines, but it was just massive open kind of, I guess, sandy areas. You could kind of go around them a lot. Here, it's just not the case. There are just mines bleeding everywhere, and you've got a mixture of mines. So where he was showing the video, they appeared to be laying anti-personnel mines amongst the anti-tank mines. So, and I showed you that video the other day, the mine roller that blew up a big anti-tank mine and then 6 anti-personnel mines in about 6 meters. Just a huge proliferation of these dangerous bits of kit that means it's an absolute nightmare to advance. And that is one of the big successes of the Russians in this whole war. This, and one of the big things to think about, because any war going forward, mines are going to be massive. So therefore, it's going to be about demining at scale. It's going to be using some AI-based learning thing, drone, whatever. AGV, isn't it? UGV, so unmanned ground vehicle. So just going around, finding this stuff, and then quickly demining. I don't know whether you'd have to use people or whatever, but it might just be the inspection of the areas done autonomously. And I don't know, just there are going to be a lot of people thinking long and hard. I mean, I did that thread the other day where I said, you guys, how would you clear these mines and demine these fields? And you guys had loads of really cool ideas for doing that. Everything from hovercrafts to, I don't know, these kind of UGV tractors, autonomously or remote controlled tractors. So yeah, loads of great ideas, but it is going to be where people are going to be thinking going forward. So he talks about, as I say, I'll repeat this. The objective of Minefield extends beyond causing harm. It also aims to impose specific mindset and tactical approach on the opponent, compelling them to act in a manner most advantageous for the party laying a minefield. Minefields limit the enemy's maneuvering options. Mechanized units are used for maneuvering, executing assaults, bypassing enemy positions, and launching flanking maneuvers. Their firepower and off-road speed makes them ideal for such operations. However, minefields restrict maneuvering space, hampering the assault's tempo. When encountering minefields, the enemy must allocate extra resources for mine clearance, including engineering vehicles. Yet, even after clearance, the available path remains narrow, compelling large forces to move predictably along a confined route. So again, even if you have cleared out pathways, you now know your force, you know that the enemy is going to be going down that particular narrow path, and there's going to be lots of them going down there. So it's like, everyone, lay down your artillery right there, and it becomes a sort of pinch point. It is often mistakenly assumed by observers that Russians and Ukrainians are not utilizing tank plows to clear paths. However, this is inaccurate as both sides employ tank plows. It is important to note, though, that tank plows are not a universal solution to all the challenges. While not widely adopted tactic, the utilization of off-route mines, such as the TM83, is not uncommon. It enables the engagement of tanks from the flank once they are detected by mine sensors, rather than relying on the pressure exerted on the tank's weight itself. So these are, and we saw some of these earlier in the war on Russian vehicles going past. So some of the Palm, is it Palm 2? Some of those mines that trigger from the side. So you trigger it by driving over it or tripping a wire, whatever, and then it fires from the side, and you get a rocket from the side, rather than the plow triggering the mine and the metal plow taking the brunt of the explosion. This triggers and fires from the side and hits you. So yeah, they haven't been widely seen, probably because they're more expensive and rarer. Another alternative is the use of modified mine setups that are designed to resist mine plows. In this specific case, the mine is configured to detonate approximately 1.5 to 2 meters after encountering the plow. So it has like a timed detonation. That would be, pretty problematic, because then your AEV, or your tank, it might just be a tank with a plow on the front. Your tank then does get blown up and not the plow. As troops follow the narrow cleared path, if the clearing tank is immobilized, it significantly hampers or even blocks the movement of the column. This situation presents a perfect opportunity for artillery to target and inflict damage on the immobilized and slowed down forces. It's what we saw south of Malotokmachka. It's what we saw around Vuhledar, where there were these clogged up areas where artillery can just hammer them. With Vuhledar, what you had is mines being laid all over the place by both sappers and by sending up these ram shells by artillery that explode and then drop loads of mines. You'd have the Russians attack, get hit on loads of mines, then one going around them hit another mine, and another one going around those two tanks and hitting another mine. There were that many mines. And then, where they felt they cleared behind them, as they were doing this maneuver, there was artillery being sent up and laying mines behind where they'd cleared. So then they go, right, we're calling this off, we've lost too many vehicles, then drive back and drive through a minefield that they thought they'd cleared. And it was just, unmitigated disaster. Reinstalling mines after their detonation or removal by the enemy is a critical factor. This introduces an additional layer of complexity that the assaulting side must plan for, prepare, and counteract. Insufficient preparation results in a reduction of mechanized firepower advantage in assaulting forces, shifting the battlefield dynamics to artillery duels and infantry assaults. Or prior planning prevents piss poor performance. All the P's. This restricts and challenges maneuverability for the assaulting side. In summary, the critical role of minefields and anti-tank measures in limiting enemy maneuverability and impeding their mechanized forces from achieving a breakthrough is evident. However, the root cause of this failure lies in the absence of proper planning and bad intelligence. Minefields add complexity, but without effective planning, they are not detrimental. If planners on the assaulting side fail to allocate resources properly, make incorrect decisions based on bad intel, or order assault despite insufficient resources, they're bound to fail. Absolutely true. But of course, the trouble is, if you've got a time frame with which to commit to a maneuver. So if you've got a counteroffensive that everyone's saying this has to be wrapped up by this date, or if you don't succeed by here, it's going to be all over. There's going to be an election in the US, and people are going to be bored of helping Ukraine over there, and those people over there are not going to be supporting you after 6 months' time. Then you're like, right, we've got to do this now. We've got to get this achieved really quickly, and of course that then pressures you to make mistakes, considering it takes just an awful long time to get through to breach these obstacles. So I think this is why they are concentrating so much on hammering the artillery, because if there is no artillery and you can hem the troops in the trench lines, and if you can hammer them with cluster munitions, then you can take as long as you like. Give or take, you can approach the demining exercise with care and attention, and take all the time that you need to do that. Whereas if you're trying to do that while being hit from above by artillery, then it becomes much more difficult. Interestingly, someone else said today, why haven't we seen the Ka-52 attack helicopters? They were like really prevalent a couple of weeks ago, and it's a really good point, actually. There's a lot of footage coming out of Ka-52 attack helicopters in the Zaporizhia front line hitting Ukrainian mechanized equipment, because they had like an 8-kilometer range, and ATGMs firing back only had a sort of 5-kilometer range. So the Russian attack helicopters that could fly under the radar, and they would have that range advantage. They were doing a lot of damage, but actually, I don't know if we've seen, if there's possibly a movement forward of quality air defenses from the Ukrainians, such that we're just not seeing these attack helicopters as much. Maybe they've lost a few and they're being more cautious. But yeah, that's interesting, because you start adding that to artillery and ATGMs, trying to clear minefields is a nightmare. So you want to take out all of those options. That's where cluster munitions, counter battery fire, and hammering artillery pieces and MLRS with HIMARS and precision guided munitions and air defense is going to be really, really important. Right, Mick Ryan, the retired Australian general, always worth popping into his thread. A just and enduring peace is not possible until Ukraine defeats Russian forces occupying its territory, ejects Russian forces, and establishes a deterrent regime that ensures the long-term security of its territory and its people. A key part to this is the ongoing Ukrainian offensives. It is now 5 weeks since the beginning of the Ukrainian offensive was confirmed by Zelensky. As such, it is time for a campaign update on the 2023 Ukrainian offensives. In my 10th of June Substack post about the Ukrainian offensives, I described 3 important battlegrounds in a wider Ukrainian 2023 campaign. Nothing has occurred yet which changes these 3 battlegrounds, although I would add 2 more: the adaptation and attrition battles. Battle of logistic and transport hubs. This continues as part of the Ukrainian deep battle in the east. So the deep battle, if I understand what he's talking about there, is actually a Soviet doctrine, which is kind of probe everywhere along a front line to find a weak point. And once you find a weak point, you pile into that weak point. And that's kind of what it looks like the Ukrainians are going to be doing. They are probing and probing and probing to find a weak point on the front line. And then you would imagine they're going to pile in. But before they do that, they need to make sure that there is no artillery around there, all the kind of stuff I've just been talking about. In the east and the south, the Ukrainians continue to seek to seize or seize key locations that will provide a hub for transport and the logistics required to sustain the Russian operations. Proximate to many of these are also where reserve forces are being held, and these are also high-value targets. If you kill reserve forces, you degrade tactical adaptive capacity and the ability to react to Ukrainian battlefield gains. So we've seen recently a couple of bases hit. I mean, the claim the other day that another 200 were taken out in another strike. Command and control hubs being hit, as well as obviously the logistic hubs, and that just means, it means that it's going to be really difficult for the Russians to react, as he says. But also, there's the kind that actually a lot of the Russian reserves are on the front line as it is. Seizing the initiative, both sides continue to seek the tactical and operational initiative. In the south, Ukraine has seized the tactical initiative and is conducting its breaches and attacks where and when it chooses. It is a tough but steady bite and hold approach. And I think that is correct. I think that's what we're seeing. Nibble off little bits, consolidate, move on. I mean, it's time consuming. In the east, Ukraine has the initiative now in the Battle of Bakhmut. The Russians are, however, attacking on the Crimea-Svatova axis. At the operational level, the Ukrainians have the initiative with combat forces in reserve. The adaptation battle, the subject of how both sides have adapted, has been a central theme of my writing about the war in Ukraine. And he is actually an expert on adaptation. He's written a book on that, I think. There are multiple examples of adaptation by both sides in this war. In the Ukrainian offensives, there is an example of tactical adaptation which Ukraine started to use with Ukraine starting to use dismounted distributed minefield breaching instead of heavy mounted breach operations. Ukraine has also adapted its tactics to in the south. So I talked about this kind of dismounted. There was an article that I was referring to the other day that talks about how the sappers are doing this by foot because they're losing too many pieces of demining equipment. At the same time, Russia has been adapting. A key adaptation has been their response to the introduction of HIMARS in mid 2022. Since then, the Russians have evolved their command and control and logistics to make it harder to target and more survivable, complicating the Ukrainian deep battle. And that's what, to refer back to what I was talking about earlier in one of those Trent-Selenko threads. The attrition battle. Every military activity features attrition. Even in peacetime, military organizations suffer attrition through training injuries, poor retention, and bad equipment maintenance. This is magnified in war by combat losses, injuries, and sickness, as well as psychological injury. So to call this war a war of attrition is just to state the obvious about all military endeavors. That said, the fight to outproduce their adversary and turn materiel into battlefield capacity at a faster and greater rate over a longer period of time remains an important element for both sides in this war that Russia is pursuing against Ukraine. It is a war of industrial systems with Russia, Ukraine, the US, and Europe beginning, and Australia and other countries in South Korea, to step up production of munitions and other equipment. Key material includes artillery ammunition, engineer equipment, drones, logistics, and precision munitions. The strategic influence fight. Beyond the battlefield, both sides seek to gain ascendancy in the battle of strategic influence. Ukraine has demonstrated mastery of strategic communications in the war. Russia has also shown the ability to influence the Chinese and global south. While many will focus on the tactical aspects of this campaign, the strategic influence campaigns of Ukraine and Russia are being rolled out at pace. We are being saturated with messages from Russian sources and Russian apologists about the failure of the Ukrainian offensives. And that's really important. We're seeing that all the time. They're on my threads below. There are Russian trolls just operating at scale, and that is a tremendous challenge to how we understand what is going on, to our access to the truth and an accurate representation of reality. From the Ukrainian side, there is a tight operational security about battlefield progress. The Ukrainians have to be successful in their 2023 offensives, and they have to make politicians and citizens beyond Ukraine believe that they have been successful. In conclusion, we have passed the end of the beginning in the Ukrainian offensive. While some initial Ukrainian attacks probably did not succeed as well as some hoped, there has been steady progress and adaptation to Ukrainian operations. I don't know that we are past the end of the beginning, actually. I think we're still very much in the beginning phases here. There's still this kind of attritional phase of sort of seeking out. It's almost like seed operations, except it's like suppression or destruction of enemy instead of air defenses, although that is a component. There's a destruction of enemy artillery um, pieces. So it's maybe seep. I think that's where we're at really, and we're still there. As with all wars, there is an abundance of ambiguity. The degree to which both sides are having their fighting power, intellectual, moral, and physical, degraded in the Ukrainian offensives is unclear. The Ukrainians do have the operational initiative, however, but there are months of tough fighting, artillery duels, and influence operations ahead. The Ukrainians are seeking to advance against an enemy that has prepared well for a large-scale defensive campaign. The outcomes of the 5 key elements of the Ukrainian offensives described in the thread will largely determine the success or otherwise of Ukraine's 2023 campaign. So, not too much I disagree with there. Absolutely, adaptation is key. And I, as I said, I think we're still in the early stages, and so trying to evaluate how well Ukraine are doing is difficult given operational security, as mentioned. But I think yes, it is slow. Yes, it's grinding. But the this kind of attrition of those key categories that I talk about every day, I think will soon begin to really bite the Russians. I think it already is. So Dimitri from War Translated says Russia's Mobiks in Bakhmut refuse to complete suicide orders, and this all kind of feeds into that. Why are there so many Russian units sending out videos complaining about everything? It's because things are crap for them, and they don't have the ammo, and logistics have been hit, and that they don't have the artillery support that they should have. They don't have close air support because there's still contested airspace. So then when they're asked to go out and attack, then it arguably is suicidal because they, as I say all the time, if they stay there, they get hit by IODs. If they go back, they get shot by barrier troops. If they go forward, it's suicidal, and they don't have enough. Equipment to do a really good job. What are they doing? What are they trying to achieve? What's the whole point of them being there? Morale, etc., etc. So, some Mobiks in Bakhmut refused to complete suicide orders and are now threatened with being shot by their leadership. The men hit all the bingo cards. Terrible commanders, no ammo, no artillery and aviation support, delays in payments, and no rotational rest. You put all of that stuff together, and life sucks to be a mobilized soldier, Russian mobilized soldier. Some of these people have been fighting for just insane amounts of time. Just think what you've been doing for the last, 8 months, right? And how much time you've had off, and how much time you get to relax during the week, so on and so forth. I know that many of you have hard jobs out there, and etc. etc. But imagine being a Russian mobilized soldier that has been fighting non-stop for 8 months, every single day, no rotation. It's amazing they're still alive, some of them. Quote from this is a translation of one of their complaints here. Hello, we're the mobilised from the 85th Brigade. Together with us are also contractors whose contracts ran out, but they're still fighting here with us now for 10 to 11 months. 8 months, 10 to 11 months. We'd like to say that during all this time, we've been mobilised for 7 to 8 months. We have always unconditionally completed all orders at fronts near Crimea and Bilohorivka without fear. But now we've been thrown to Bakhmut to unprepared, unmined positions. With a drunk company commander who led us to these positions. We didn't reach them. We were shelled with tanks, mortars, Polish missiles. We came to the company commander and complained that we won't pass there. We came across employees of PMC Hurricane, so that's another private military company, a mercenary group, who were leaving those positions. They were the first with losses. They explained to us that they're simply suiciders. We won't pass there. That we're simply suiciders. To which the company commander said we needed to complete the order, but as we're the mobilised, not stormtroopers or Spetsnaz, without ammo, without food, without evacuation, without vehicles, we are thrown in like stormtroopers. We were thrown in as stormtroopers. We refused, only laying down weapons by the order of the brigade commander under threats of shooting, accused of betrayal, and threatened with imprisonment. We didn't reach these positions. We are now sat in Svetodarsk, in some strange building, but as they didn't take away our phones, we're trying to record a video for our relatives who could help us. We do not refuse to fight. We can take weapons again, but not in this direction and not in the first line of defense. As I already said, we always followed our orders without being afraid under mortar and enemy bullets. But now, after this time, we're simply defeated psychologically by our command. We don't even have medals for the SMO, the Special Military Operation. We're not given any payments. By the way, our salaries come late and not in full. Oops. And sorry, to continue, there's no rotation, no rest provided to us, so that's what it is. And we're now accused of betrayal and cowardice, forgetting about our previous achievements. We were sent there without artillery and aviation support, which are unable to suppress the enemy fire. We came under shelling, and after all that happened, the commander, answering why our artillery and aviation were silent, said, "There's no ammo. Go die an honourable death." Wow. But we're not suiciders. We're simple, mobilised workmen, just like anyone else. Imagine that. Imagine your job tomorrow. They said, "Oh, I need you to go and do that out in the yard." And you say, "Yeah, but hang on. Isn't there like an 80% chance, or isn't there like a 60% chance I'll die?" And you'd be like, "Yeah, go on then. Go and do it." And you're like, "I don't want to do it. Why would I?" these are huge existential. We kind of almost take it for granted. Like that's you stopping existing. Because someone said to you, go into work today, and there's a 10% chance you might die. You'd be thinking 10%, 1 in 10 chance I'm going to die today. Now imagine your job is being sent into bullets and mines and tank fire and whatever. You're thinking 10%, 10% is good. We forget how absolutely terrible that must be. There's one thing defending your homeland because you're under existential threat from others, but these mobilized soldiers, and yeah, you can argue that they're still up for the war in general. They're not against it. They think these terrible things about the Ukrainians, and we get back to this whole idea of being victims of their own nations manipulating government and narratives and media and all that kind of stuff, of course. But just what a horrible situation to be in. Yeah. So and go and die an honourable death. Imagine being told that in your job. You're like, yeah, but normally I just move those pallets. All right, that's my job. I'm moving stuff. It's just cauliflower. I'm moving cauliflower from there to there. Yeah, but today go and die an honourable death. But just move cauliflower. But we're not suiciders. We're simple, mobilised workmen just like anyone else. We were called POWs and threatened with killing, threatened to be sent to storm units containing unprepared people or sent back to the zero line. But we're simply afraid that our commanders will shoot us there. We do not refuse to serve and complete combat tasks, just not in this direction, not on the first line, and not with these commanders. And that's them complaining in that video there. That's what they have to say. So, wow, I mean, just is yet another. I mean, this is nothing that I haven't told you already, but these keep coming out. When you see that many of these videos coming out every single week, every day, you've got a problem. Right, Janet Yellen, who is I've been talking for way too long. So she is US Treasury Secretary. She says redoubling Ukraine's support is the single best thing for global economy. It's really interesting. So this is the economic argument for supporting Ukraine. Redoubling support for Ukraine is the best way to improve the international economy, US Secretary Janet Yellen said on the sidelines of the G20 summit on finance ministers in India, AFP reported. Quote, ending this war is first and foremost a moral imperative, she told reporters, which is at the G20 summit, but it's also the single best thing we can do for the global economy. I mean, corporations, businesses, economies love stability. Wars are not good for stability. Therefore, economies don't like wars. Finishing this war as soon as possible is the best thing for global economics. Therefore, supporting Ukraine, which is a moral imperative, will also help, and helping them win as soon as possible will also help everyone's pockets. There you go. Do it. Right, I'm going to leave you with some joy. It's time for another couple of wildlife segments here. I'm going to show you another Foxy Fox foxing about a mobile phone here. Gets its little mouth, little vixen there. Oh, not vixen, little cub by the looks of it. Having a little play around. It's funny that as soon as he gets a mobile, he then stands up and goes, hang on, you little bugger. So there you go. So that should give you a little bit of joy. Now, I don't know about this. I might get done for copyright because this has got music over it, but it kind of helps to have the music. So I'm going to keep quiet. This is 2 minutes, right, of just Ukrainian animals. It's just lovely. Just to leave you on a positive. You can stop now if you don't want to watch like animals and Ukrainian soldiers do stuff concerning animals, but I'm going to play this out. I'm going to play the music, and if YouTube don't like it, I might have to just mute this bit, but there you go.
Здається, що то було так давно, коли в руках тримаю цей альбом. Нам було абсолютно все одно, не маючи нічого мати все. За гроші не купити тільки час. Він всіх нас методично поділив. Когось він опустив, когось підняв, а є на кого взагалі забив. Старі фотографії на стіл.
Now that I'm going to stop that actually and talk about that mine. You might think, oh my goodness, but actually with anti-tank mines, they take an awful lot of pressure to trigger those mines. And actually, you know, combat veteran React was talking about how you can jump up and down on those mines and they won't go off, but he advises not to do that. But yeah, so they are relatively safe. I've seen those piled into the back of like trucks and driven off, and you're thinking, I wouldn't want to be in that truck, like sat amongst like 200 anti-tank mines. But you know. I'm going to say that is a little bit disturbing. That's something that's just really disturbing.
Дешеве пиво і сухе вино робили нас щасливими людьми. І ніби чудо польське радіо нам відкривало той незнаний світ. Ми жили всі так, ніби то був сон, і можна бути вічно молодим. А залишився тільки цей альбом, а мрії розлетілися як дим. Старі фотографії на стіл розклади, дитячі історії смішні розкажи. І справжнім друзям не забудь подзвони, бо добре числе з тобою завжди вони. Ми грали примітивну музику, так чесно, що пробила би до сліз. Чекали, що прийде такий момент, коли під ноги впаде цілий світ. Годинник вперто роки рахував, і кожен так як вмів, так і зробив. І тільки у альбомі всі підряд ми будемо такими, як тоді. Старі фотографії на стіл розклади, дитячі історії смішні розкажи.
So there you go. Call me schmaltzy or whatever. Just it's nice to have a bit of positivity to end a video that's ostensibly about one side blowing the shit out of the other. Excuse my French. It's an affliction I have. Thank you so much for all your support. Take care. I will speak to you tomorrow. Stay safe.